Can you see the screen showing PowerPoint? I'm sure you would be able to see the screen. So I'll just give a short presentation, giving an introduction on the GTAP database, and giving a motivation on the whole GTAP project, and then some specific information about GTAP 8 database. So this is the outline of this presentation. I'll start with the motivation of the idea of GTAP center, GTAP project, and database model, and everything, how it all started, and so on. And secondly, I'll talk about the database. How do we produce GTAP database? What are the components, and what's the methodology? And then I'll go over some specific features of GTAP 8 database. And hopefully I'll also show you to do some aggregation using GTAP Ag after the presentation. So this is the motivation for the how GTAP, how this project started, and how the center was established, and so on. So in the late 80s and early 90s, there was an increasing demand for quantitative analysis of policy issues, largely on global trade, and all this kind of analysis required extensive data and huge models, because policymakers were really interested in knowing what are the economy-wide impacts of all kinds of policies. So they really needed large models to meet such requirements, and data requirements were also extensive. Some examples of the policy initiatives happening in like those periods, like in the late 80s and early 90s, are all these WTO basically, and a lot of free trade agreements starting from NAFTA, and the integration of European Union, and the environmental issues culminating into the Kyoto Protocol and the WTO accession of China, and so on. So before this center, the project started, we had two different modes of doing this kind of research, developing these models, building such data sets. They were done in two different kind of ways. One was done by specific agencies, like some international agencies, some governmental organizations, and so on. And they were done in-house. By in-house, I mean they actually presented the results in public forums, but they never had the data or the model available for public to use, or even for researchers to use. It was just very closed. But there were some like models and data sets developed by university research centers. So these were the two different ways. And as I mentioned in the first a kind of doing things where the agencies do the models and the data, they were not shared outside, and then they were not sustained. So they start, for example, they had a lot of funding for a particular year. They developed a huge database and a huge model, used it, and then probably they found some findings. They got some findings which were not very interesting, so maybe they didn't continue such projects. So no project was sustained, and you could not compare two different initiatives. So it wasn't very consistent, so to say, over the years, and of course not publicly available. For the university projects, they were usually academic. They were targeted towards journals, not so much linked with the policy makers and so on. So there was a clear gap. You either do rigorous research, which is also published and so on, but may not be very policy related. But otherwise, you do policy oriented research, but not publicly available. So, what GTAP, the idea of this project, Global Trade Analysis Project, was to combine the advantages of both approaches. Obviously, both approaches have advantages. Like, the policy research is very specific. It's for the it's directly relevant for policymakers, so um, they know what kind of models and what kind of data sets are needed. So we get inputs from them, and it's based in academia. So the rigor is there, and quality is given due importance, and it's a sustained model. So it's a publicly funded project. It has regular funding. We just celebrated 20th anniversary yesterday of the GTAP Center, the project. So one reason why we could sustain for such a long time is it's probably because it's based in academia, um, and we also so we do a lot of different things, and the major function of this project is to develop a global economic database and model. And both this data and model are fully documented. You have the documentation on the website. In fact, the model is freely available for anyone to use. Not only the standard model, but also a lot of variants. They're all available for anyone to download. And it's easy to use with it's very easy to use, but may not be very easy to interpret the results and so on. So we have regular courses for explaining how to understand the model, how to run simulations, and how to make sense out of them and so on. And it's also accessible to non-modelers. So that the data set, although it's mainly targeted for the CGE community, it can also be used for others. And even for non-technical persons, they can look at the data and see what it's trying to say. So we are not just the center. The center is the place where the efforts are coordinated. But we are basically, GTAP is a global network of about 10,000 researchers, policymakers, who conduct quantitative analysis of policy issues, particularly on international economics, international trade, and so on. And the role of the huge GTAP network is twofold. One is to improve the quality of data, to contribute different components of data, and also to facilitate quantitative analysis of global economic issues using models. We have various different types of GTAP models, different variants, which are developed by a lot of network members. Basically, the database is the centerpiece of the project, and we have these consortium members. We also call them board members, advisory board members. So as you can see, this list, they are spread all over the world. They also cut across the types of agencies. You have government bodies, you have research institutions, you even have some private consulting agencies, international institutions, and so on. And it's almost, you can say that these are all who's who of international policy arena. So database, which is the focus of today's forum. What's the importance of database? All of you know that it's needed for credible policy analysis, which is why you're interested in this data. And the philosophy of GTAP data strategy or data construction strategy is not to do everything here. So our job is not to sit and do every other thing that is needed for constructing the database. What we do is find the best person in the world to do that particular job, one particular data component. Say, for example, if you take bilateral trade in merchandise commodities, Mark Gelhard he used to be with USDA and now with US Department of Interior, and he has done really rigorous work on that, and he is probably the best person who can actually reconcile the data from UN Comtrades, which is a lot of problems there. For example, the exporters do not agree with importers for a particular bilateral trade flow. He has come up with very, very rigorous and tested strategies, methodologies, and he is probably the best person in the world for this kind of data for bilateral trade in merchandise. So we are not just talking about the statistical agencies; we are talking about quality data, starting from. Of course, we have the data out there. We have even Comtrades. We have a lot of raw data out there. So we need a person who really knows about the data and who can clean it and who can provide it to us. So the incentive we give them is give the whole data to it. The complete database is given back to them. So that's the philosophy. So they get two credits. One is, first of all, the very credit of being a part of the database construction team. And second is they're going to get the whole database free in return. So that's how we have grown over the years, the GTAP database. So GTAP, the center here in Purdue establishes standards. We have some standards for IO tables, and we do some comparisons for all the data that we get, trade, protection, support, and so on. And we coordinate the work with the contributors, and then we assemble everything into one single usable database. We have all these different components from different people. Our job is to integrate them, ensure quality, coordinate the work with them, and as you may realize by now, most of this work is done on a voluntary basis. Nothing much is on paid basis. They all put in efforts, and of course they are going to get the database in return, but otherwise it's just voluntary. So it takes a lot of efforts from the center to coordinate the work. We have to incentivize, we have to make sure we get the work. Of course, we have a great team of contributors who have been doing it for a long time, but the center's job is to coordinate the efforts and put together a single database. So, as I mentioned, because of these strategies, we have grown from 15 regions in version 1 of GTAP database to 120 regions in version 8. And the sectors have grown from 37 sectors to 57 sectors. So the reference years so we used to have one reference year for every version until version 7, and for version 8 we have 2 reference years, and hopefully in the future we'll have more reference years. The reason for having multiple reference years for a single version is to make sure that the users can compare data over the years. For example, if you compare version 7 with version 6, it's not going to be very useful because the sources were different, the methodologies were different, particularly if you take protection data, for example, domestic support data, for example, they have all changed a lot in these 2 versions. Whereas in version 8, we have tried our best to have identical sources and methodologies for both years. So it's not just about identical sources and methodologies, but also even the same source may revise the data over the years. For example, for version 7, for many data components, we've used the same sources as we had in version 7, but the data has changed even for 2004. For the same year, we have a lot of changes in the data. So just to make sure we have the the latest available data from the source, and same methodology. You're having multiple base years. And so I just talked about these three before. And how do we get the national databases? So before I go any further, I should have probably mentioned what is actually there in GTAP database. I'll come to that again later, but it's basically input-output data, the use of commodities for the production of other commodities, and also for used by the final demand, consumers, government, investment, exports, and so on. In addition to that, we also have bilateral trade data. We have protection data. By protection, I mean tariff data, basically. And we also have domestic support data, subsidies for output, input, factors, and so on. Also for exports, export subsidies. So we have all these different data components combined together, and with proper balance conditions satisfied, balance and sign conditions satisfied. For the national databases, that is the IO tables for different countries, input-output tables, we have maybe dozens of national collaborators for different countries. We close to 100 probably. And for bilateral trade data, particularly the merchandise trade data and the margins, the international transportation margins, we use Comtrade data, and we do not use the data directly, but it's processed by Mark Elhar, who right now works with the US Department of Interior. And for the protection data, that's a tariff, we get data from the International Trade Commission Geneva, further processed by CEPI, which is in Paris. And for domestic support data, we get extensive information on different types of payments, on output, intermediate inputs, factors, and so on for the OECD countries and for all the EU members, EU 27, and also for a few non-member countries like China, South Africa, and Brazil. And yeah, so the export subsidies data is based on notifications by the WTO members and further processed by David Laborde from IFPRI. So this is all about the different components. So we have a few requirements for IO tables, which are basically contributed by the GTAP network members. First of all, it's product by product or commodity by commodity, and if you have it product by industry, you need to convert it to product by product. And you've probably noticed that we have 57 sectors in GTAP database, but our contributors are not required to contribute tables with all 57 sectors. But we do say that you need at least 30 sectors. So you don't need all the 57 sectors, but have at least 30 sectors. And you separate food and agriculture, energy, and others. So you have three blocks. You have food and agricultural sectors as a block, energy as a block, other as a block. Of course, you are free to contribute 57 sectors too, but in case you are contributing aggregated sectors, make sure that, for example, paddy rice is not mixed with coal. You don't have a sector which is an aggregation of rice and coal, for example. So that's all we need. We just want separated out the food and agricultural commodities, the energy commodities, and other commodities. So that's a condition. And we also want imports and domestic use separated, maybe based on some assumptions. It can be as simple as just imposing the domestic import share at the aggregate level on the use matrix. And the value added, you need capital and labor, and also land, but land is optional because we have a procedure in-house where we sum up all the value-added payments, and we have the shares of land, labor, and capital in agricultural sectors, and we use those shares to split the value added accordingly. So, and as you may have noticed in the standard database, land, not only in the standard database, even in the land use database, land is used only by agricultural commodities. So we also want tax information. So we need tax inclusive matrix and the tax exclusive matrix. We have a lot of sign conditions, no negative flows, and stocks are allowed, but otherwise no negative flows. And basically we remove these stocks eventually in the database construction process. And we want sales to be equal to costs, and we want some reasonable shares in terms of dwellings, government taxes. So taxes shouldn't be ridiculous. Maybe you can't have something like 1,000% tax or so on, and then look at the unusual. So what we do, so the first checks we do is all these things. For example, so government should primarily have all this construction and all the. There is a sector called OSG, other government services. That's what has to be the major component of government, whereas construction has to be major component in dwellings. So we do check these shares, and so these are initial checks, and then we do some entropy theoretic comparisons of the shares in the IO tables with the shares from what we call a representative table, which is a table that contains a lot of different countries, IO tables of a lot of different countries, which probably have some reasonable shares. We also compare at times with the older table. For example, somebody is contributing a new table for US, so we compare it with the existing table we use in GTAP database. So that's another thing we do. So we identify the strange shares and flag them, and then discuss in-house to see what can be done, and we get back to the contributors as to what kind of changes have to be made. Sometimes it could be as simple as changing the mappings. You could probably change how the sector have been mapped from their set of sectors to GTAP sectors. Maybe I'll give some examples to make it clearer. Say, for example, the use of oil seeds in vegetable oils has to be pretty high, say 60%, as seen in this share from the representative IO table. But we found for some IO table just 14%. So the entropy measure, which measures the distance between these two, looks very high here. So it's probably something to think about. We should probably get back to them, see why don't oils use a lot of oil seeds. If they have some good reason, we can just accept it. Otherwise, we can do more research on that. So getting into sugar is not a good thing. So the representative IO table says that maybe about 1% of sugar, 1% of commodities used for sugar production can be sugar. But when you say 30%, that definitely means there is probably some kind of mapping issue. For example, this includes probably both sugar and sugarcane. See, for example, see sugar here and see sugar use in sugar sector and sugarcane use in sugar sector. So you see that of the total use in sugar, just 3% is from sugarcane and 31% is from sugar. I think it clearly suggests that you have some mapping issues here. You probably need to map this sector sugar in the IO table to both sugarcane and sugar, and then we have some procedures to disaggregate it in-house. Similarly, I can look at this cattle going into cattle meat. it obviously has to be higher because cattle meat is produced from cattle. So it has to be at least 30% as this representative IO table suggests. But the IO share, I mean the share in the IO table that was contributed is just 1%. Now I look for the other commodities used for producing cattle meat, and I get here and I see other animal products used in cattle meat comprise 20%, whereas they should be around 5%. And what is this other animal products? It's basically things like chicken, eggs, and so on. So there's something wrong here. So probably I would probably aggregate these two sectors together, and we have a better data set in-house based on Food and Agricultural Organization FAO statistics, which has reasonable shares for all this agricultural sectors and food sectors. So we probably use those shares to split cattle meat and cattle and other animal products rather than just using these sectors. So these are the things, some things that we use for quality control for IO tables. So I'll briefly talk about a lot of international data sets we use, and first is energy. We have volumes and prices, volumes in million tons of oil equivalent, and prices from the International Energy Agency for energy data set. We have a lot of different types of protection and support data. MacMap, which is basically CEPI and ITC, basically, and the domestic support, which is OECD, and also Eurostat. It's a production support estimate, and we have at least for 2004, we have the data on export tax equivalents of quotas that came with the multi-fiber arrangement and the agreement on textiles and clothing. And we also have export subsidies, which used to be contributed by Aziz El Bairi, who is with FAO now, and it is being contributed by David Laborde, who is with FPRI. So for trade data set, we have merchandise and services, and for merchandise we have Mark Gellhard, and for services we have a couple of contributors from CPB, Nico van Leeuwen and Arhan Leor, and we also use IMF data for this purpose. And for macro data, it's basically the GDP and the shares of consumption, investment, and government expenditure, and also population. You get all this data from World Bank. And for income and factor taxes, we get data from IMF. And we also have, for the OECD countries, we have the agricultural production data from OECD and Eurostat. So basically the idea here is to make sure that the production of each agricultural sector matches the production figures given by OECD and Eurostat. Even if the IO tables are deviate a bit from these official statistics, we try to match them explicitly using this procedure called agricultural production targeting. It's very important mainly because it makes sure that the subsidies and taxes are not too much different from the real numbers, because they are very sensitive for agriculture. And forgot to mention that we have 244 countries for which we have all this data. Most of this data, I should say, not this agricultural data, it's just for OECD countries, but all the other data sets we have for almost all 244 countries. We may probably have, for some we may have 200, for some we have 220, and so on. But we try our best to collect data on all the 244 countries. And then we aggregate all this information to the GTAP level of 129 countries. So we have this the IO tables contributed by different contributors. We have the international data sets, and we fit them together. Basically, we adjust the IO tables to target the values in the international data sets, particularly the macro data set, trade data set, energy, tariff, and so on. You get this fitted IO tables, and then you assemble the fitted IO tables with the international data sets, and the result is GTAP database. It's a very short summary of the construction process. We also have a lot of satellite data sets. I don't know if I should say energy volumes as satellite data set because it comes with your standard database. It contains data on volumes of different energy commodities, both domestic and imported, used by different agents. Um, and we have CO2 emissions data, um, basically from combustion and separated by domestic and imported. We also have non-CO2 emissions for methane, nitrous oxide, and 14 fluorinated gases. And we don't have this yet for version 8. We expect to do it by early next year. And we just recently released the land use data for 18 agroecological zones. And we also have the migration data, number of migrants by source and remittances, foreign income payments and receipts for the dynamic model. So we have something called GDYNE database. So we have a lot of things in our agenda for improvements in the future. A lot of them in this area, the IO tables, we have commodity tax improvements, billings, and we're also thinking about the domestic margins, international margins, intra-institutional detail, particularly about the government sector, for example, government and households, uh, and skill shares. I think we'll probably do this in the near future. We are planning to split the labor into 5 different categories. Right now, we just have two, unskilled and skilled. We are hoping to do it for 5 different categories. Another big thing that we are planning to do is the inter-regional input-output tables, where you can actually know what is the, for example, how much of Chinese steel is used to produce automobiles in the US, for example. So you have that level of detail of intermediate inputs from one country used for producing another commodity in a different country. We also are planning to continue the time series mode more number of years, and we are also planning to do something on water, to have explicitly defined water sector within GTAP database. So this is actually a bit of a long-term project. So yeah, so that's all I have for the presentation today. We took longer than I expected. So now that we have an introduction about the database, I'll probably give you some very practical kind of a demo kind of um, um, thing. So once you buy the database, you get a mail from Ginger giving you a link for downloading the database. So you could probably go through all these details here. You may not be in a hurry to go and click this. Probably you can just go through all these details. You can see the regions here. You can see the commodities, and what is GTAP ag, what is flex ag, and so on. So for the beginning, for the users who are new to GTAP database, we always recommend using GTAP ag because it's user friendly. It's GUI based. But there are some of you who don't like GUI and just want to work on task prompt, and such people can use FlexAg. And I would just show how to use GTAP here because I think a large number of people find this to be easier to use. So, and FlexAg can be a little bit hard, particularly if you're not introduced to, or maybe you lost touch with MS-DOS prompt. So let's go ahead and download this GTAP ag 2004. Just click there and I get this zip file. I say save, and I just say save it wherever. I save the zip file in any place, but Once I start installing, I'll be more specific. So now I click on this zip file, double click, and then click this setup.exe. Say OK. So now it opens a dialog box where it gives you some information about GTAP. So it says that if you do not have the license file, it's going to limit your aggregation to at most 3 commodities or regions, which means when you want to see an aggregation of the database, you can probably have 3 different commodities and 3 different regions. So we do not have this default license anymore. So we just have no license, or you have gtapact.lic, which we'll download in a moment. So click. So you can see that it's GTAP is giving you a suggestion on which directory to install. It's c:/gag8ay04. If you don't like this name, change it. But make sure you remember where it is. Say install. So it keeps installing it, and while it installs, it installs. It doesn't take much time. So let me open my Explorer and go to C:, and go to gag8y04. So I have a lot of GTAP versions floating around, but you would probably have this one that you installed recently. So I click here, and I see the files here, and I see that there is no license file here. Let me just maximize it. I do have, because I already had it here, but in your case you wouldn't have it. So what you should do now is to go here, download this GTAP license, save. I click this and save. Make sure you save it at the same directory. It's gag8ay04. Don't need to it's probably better to say license.zip or something meaningful name. And I figured it's just copied. So I would like to open this. So it's just the file gtapact.lic here, nothing else. So just a license file. So now let me go to this directory, and I see this license.zip. Let me just extract it to here. Okay, not to the folder license. So this is, I'll say yes to all, because I want to use the new license file, not the old I have. So here it is. So these are very simple instructions, but I'm just making sure you go through it very carefully, because a lot of different combinations and permutations possible here. For example, you could have easily extracted it to here, and your GTAP wouldn't work then. So just make sure that you have the license file on the same directory where you have all the GTAP files. Okay. So now let me click on GTAP. Okay. So I ignore the messages that came now because I had some other files in the directory which you wouldn't have, so you don't have to worry about them. So let me see. View. So you have instructions if you want to see how to aggregate and so on, and you could actually here you could actually say um, if you have data elsewhere, not in this directory, you can specify where it is, but it suggests not to use these options in the initial stage. You could probably use it later. And then if you have a specific aggregation that you want to do, you can select them, select an aggregation file. You probably wouldn't have it in the beginning. So first thing you probably want to do is look at the regional aggregation. So I want to see. So this is a set of actual regions in the database. So all these are. So you'll probably see 129 regions, and you have in this particular aggregation, in this particular default aggregation, they have defined 10. I think it's 10. Yeah, it's 10 different regions. So they define Australia, New Zealand, and rest of Oceania as part of a region called Oceania. And so you, and East Asia has China, Hong Kong, Japan, Korea, Mongolia, Taiwan, and so on. So in your case, you would probably need a different aggregation. Say, for example, you want EU27. Say, you don't want EU25, but EU27. Okay, and so for that, you would go here, and from the top of my mind, I think Bulgaria and Romania are the two new ones in EU27. So I'm just searching for Bulgaria and Romania. Yeah, so Bulgaria is here. It's right now mapped to rest of world. Let me say it's mapped to EU27. So I just click on here and say what's the region it needs to be mapped to, and click on there. And next I go to Romania, and I know this is Romania. I can see the GTAP code here, and I can see the actual description here. It's right now mapped to rest of world. Let me say it mapped to EU27. And I just say OK. I'm OK with this aggregation. And now I go to sectoral aggregation. Pretty much the same way. You have the old sectors here, you have the new sectors here. Right now we just have a 10 by 10, 10 sectors, 10 regions. And say OK. I don't want to make any change because it's just the same way you do it for the countries, regions. So just in the interest of time, I will not do anything there. And you have factors, 5 factors mapped to 5 factors. And you can save this aggregation scheme. You can say give some name here. I just give GTAP 10 by 10. Now I say create aggregated database, and it's asking where to save it. I say it's asking for and temp, and I'll just do it because I don't want to see this for a long time. So I'll just say save. And of course I already have it here because I've done it before. I'll say yes. Can replace it. So yeah, this is again because I had some other files in the beginning, so you get this error. But in your case, you wouldn't see this kind of error. So So in your case, what you would see here is once you say create aggregated database, you'll see the output. You'll be able to see the output files here, and it should just work well. Um, so yeah, so I'll just do it quickly once more. Maybe it can be a kind of revision for you, so you can just see how we do it. So I'm just downloading it and then saying, clicking setup and say install. Okay, and then we go here. Look at GTAP, and all the files are intact. These are the actual new files, and now I go back here, download the license file, save it to the same place. Go here. Okay, so now let's go here, and I won't make any changes here. I'll just say create aggregated database, save, and it should work. Yeah. So I was in my earlier version, I had a lot of other junk files which were not replaced by the installation. So this is also instructive for you, although it was not intentional. When you make some changes, so for example, you change some files in GTAP bag, which you shouldn't be doing ideally, but in case you do, make sure that you delete it and or maybe give a new name when you install GTAP bag afresh, because that can actually disturb the way aggregation works. So now you want to look at the output files, view output files, say sets.har. This shows you all the different sets, regions, commodities. So you can see that in the original database you'll have 129 regions. Here you just have 10, and in original database you had 57 sectors. Here you just have 10, and so on. And you can see the data file and all these different headers. You have imports, exports, and some revenues of tariff and subsidies. And there are some intermediate usage, endowments, and intermediate usages for the firms, for household, government, endowments, both usage of endowments as well as endowment outputs, and at different prices. Some of them are at agents prices, some are at market prices. So the difference between them would give you the taxes and subsidies. So you have all this information here, and you have it at the desired level. You didn't want to look at paddy rice and wheat and so on. So you have grains crops. You didn't want to look at Australia but Oceania. So you have it at aggregated level. So I think this is all I wanted to say. You can start typing in your questions in Skype, and the first question I got by email from Nasi and Ignacio. So the questions are pretty detailed. They're all relevant to the land use database. I would, for some of the questions, I'll have to get back in detail by email. But what I can say is, for the last question on water satellite accounts, so there is a question. The question is, if by any chance, would you know if it is planned to release satellite accounts on water? Yeah, it's there has been no particular plan in terms of like schedule, but it's some work in progress. There is a grad student working on it. There has been a group working on it, and it will probably be released once it reaches some stage. But we don't foresee this as being part of our core satellite datasets. May not be something like land use, and yeah, it's not going to be something official. It may eventually be official, but at this point we don't think of it being an official product of GTAP Center.
All right, thank you.
And this GTAP W that you mentioned here, that is definitely not official. Yeah, it's not produced by the center. Yeah. So what I'm saying is the product, the GTAP model and database with water, that is being constructed, that is being still under progress. It's in the center and it's likely to be released in the future. But what you mentioned GTAP W, I don't think it's official.
All right, thank you.
And on your other questions, I'll definitely get back to you in detail. I think they need more time, and I'll send you all the details over email. Yeah, this forum is mainly for some introductory kind of questions. Yeah, you can either type your questions here in Skype or in my email. Typing in Skype is better because you can see immediately. So any questions and I hope the GTAP pack demo was clear, although there was a problem, but I think even that was probably useful in terms of being careful. How when you play around with, first of all, you shouldn't be changing the data, but even if you do, it's better to start afresh. And one more thing I forgot to mention in GTAP Ag is that you would see a file called basedata.rx, and that is an encrypted file. And if you open that file, it's going to show some random numbers. You can't make sense out of them. So the program GTAP Ag actually converts that file into a real data file. So that's one reason you shouldn't be probably opening the files in GTAP Ag before aggregating. Yeah, so just a word of warning. I've heard some queries on people analyzing the data on this encrypted file and saying that the numbers don't make any sense. And that's really true. It doesn't make sense, but the program actually converts it into real data. So Osman has a question. is the disaggregation into so,
É coisa deles lá?
Não, nós aqui.
Ah, eu acho que não, se não deixou pronto. Mas eu perguntei.
yeah. So yeah, Osman's question was about the disaggregation of AEZ data, the logical zones data. Yes, it does apply to all countries. We have data on 129 regions and 7 sectors. So it's just a complete data set. It's fully compatible with GTAP standard. So just for information on the AEZ, we recently released this the land use database, and the way we have released it is not the land use database in isolation, but we have integrated it with the standard GTAP database, so you can actually use it with the model directly. And another probably good news is that we are going to upload the model along with the database for the subscribers who purchase the land use data. So just some additional information on land use, since Osman brought up this question. And also for information, it's not 15 AACs, it's actually 18. I think it's 18. So any more questions? We're actually pretty much on time now. If you have any short questions, please feel free to ask.
Cara, eu acho que tá acabando o negócio.
You can actually type in there so that it's.
Eu acho que tá acabando. Porque aqui, ó, olha o horário aqui, 10h56, já tá 11 horas. Aí o negócio era até às 11, né? Era das 10 às 11.
Era meio-dia 11.
Puta que pariu. Cara, mas olha, o que eu fiz? Eu fiz assim, ó, eu peguei esse horário. Bom, acho que acabou o negócio. Thank you very much. Nossa, Carraro.
Mas eles deixaram gravado, né? Ele falou que eu acho que
eles
vão gravar.
Se quiser assim, eu consegui uma pessoa.
O negócio é que depois mandar um link.
Talvez upside.
Yeah, so Ignacio has a question. For modeling purposes, does one need GEMPAC? It's a good question. For as long as
Ele está perguntando se precisa do GEMPAC. Ele está respondendo.
So it depends on the kind of modeling you want to do. So if you didn't want to modify the model, you just wanted to use some standard models available in the website, you don't need GEMPAC, and particularly for smaller aggregations. If you're going for larger aggregations, say for example more than 10 by 10 regions, 10 sectors kind of aggregations, you need a GEMPAC license. So for details on the types of GEMPAC license, which license is good for you, and so on, you could probably visit the GEMPAC website. They have a lot of options there. They also have a free introductory license for free 3 or 6 months ago. So yeah, so so in short, it depends on the kind of modeling you want to do. So the moment you want to start changing the model, it's a good idea to purchase the impact license. So you probably need GEMPEP for serious modeling, serious long-term kind of modeling.
Eu não entendi nada mesmo. Entendeu o que eu tô falando?
Indiano, né?
É difícil de.
Eu não entendi nada mesmo.
Esse cara é gente boa. Esse cara
É?
aí.
Any other questions?
Bom,
Peter, Lars?
agora eu quero mostrar para vocês o que eu fiz aqui. Né?
Daniel?
No questions. Thank you.
Eu peguei esse horário aqui, né?
Okay, we'll.
Ó. Eu peguei esse horário.
Okay, so thanks for joining this forum. Hope it was useful for everyone, and we'll upload the whole video file to the website, so you can refer to it
É
later.
a hora que tá lá, ó. 10:04.
Thank you very much again, and hope you you use GTAP database and you find it very useful. Thank you very much, and all the best.
Em Nova York é 11:04, nesse lugar